Hey everybody, how's it going? Oh, I love enthusiasm. You know, sometimes in a library, people are kind of like a little reluctant to be enthusiastic. So enthusiasm is very welcome here. So thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you everyone who's watching online. My name is Aiden Flax-Clark. I'm the director of Live from NYPL. And I am pleased to welcome you in for a conversation tonight about history, repair, and public memory, all through the lens of an incredible collection that the library is proud to steward and that just recently became available to the public, the Rikers Public Memory Oral History Collection. It documents and preserves the experiences of those who have been directly impacted by the Rikers Island jail complex and supports the campaign to close the facilities. It comprises 90 oral history interviews conducted between 2018 and 2021 with formerly incarcerated individuals and their families. The interviews range from 20 minutes to over 2 hours and also includes transcripts and photographs of some of the narrators. All told, it is a profound, intimate, and most importantly, deeply human portrait of what is tragically a major part of this city's story. Like all the incredible collections that we have in this building and in all of our research libraries, the Rikers Public Memory Project Oral History Collection is freely available to all of you as long as you have a library card, and God help you if you're in this building without a library card. Okay, that sounded a little like nervous laughter. I'm hoping it's, I'm gonna trust you're all good. But my friend and colleague Meredith Mann, who is the curator of manuscripts in our Manuscripts, Archives, and Rare Books division, which is where the collection is held, is going to come out to tell you more about the collection in a minute, and hopefully you can go visit her and her colleagues up in room 328 upstairs to spend time with the people on these recordings, because they are truly incredible. After Meredith, our panel will take the stage for a discussion. The panel includes historian and teacher Dr. Shana Russell, filmmaker and photographer Edwin Santana, narrator Turquoise Martin, and oral historian and interdisciplinary artist Tamara Santibañez. Their full bios are in your programs. If you're watching online, the bios are on the event listing. You can read more about them there. When you came in the room, you hopefully got a note card. The note cards are for asking questions. I know the panel will be glad to take some questions at the end. If you're watching online, you can put your question in the chat and we can also get it there. We'd love to hear from all of you wherever you are. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isbahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course by all of you here. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for your support, and please join me in welcoming Meredith Mann.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see all of your faces and to know that many others are joining us on our live stream tonight. My name is Meredith Mann, and I'm the Interim Charles J. Liebman Curator of Manuscripts for the New York Public Library. In 2022, the library added 90 oral history interviews conducted by the Rikers Public Memory Project to the Manuscripts and Archives division here at 42nd Street. And a few months ago, we opened these interviews to the public as, I was about to gesture to a screen that I thought would be up, but it's just the line, added it to the library's collections as the Rikers Public Memory Project Oral History Collection. Each interview documents the unique experience of someone directly impacted by Rikers Island. By acquiring this collection, the New York Public Library commits to preserving these vital recordings so that in this fragile world where websites may come and go, they are forever cared for and accessible to you and the public. I had the privilege of attending an event with the Rikers Public Memory Project last fall and hearing from its staff and community of narrators, both in person and by listening to this amazing archive. At that event, I was continually struck by the generosity of each person who contributed to this project. Generosity to tell their story, to revisit moments of pain and suffering, and share these moments with strangers whom they've never met, so that we might know, remember, and learn. Generosity to imagine a better world and to see the way that their testimony forms a bridge between that world and our own. The library is so proud and honored to hold these interviews where they can enrich and expand the stories we are able to tell and the research, inquiry, and creative projects we can support for all of our patrons. I hope that each and every one of you visits our reading room up on the 3rd floor to listen to these recordings. As Aiden said, all you need is a library card, and to see how this archive resonates with research collections from across the library. Through these interviews, we can reimagine what an archive can do. It can change minds, it can open eyes, it can repair injustice, and it can build community. I see a community gathered here tonight, and I'm grateful to learn and reimagine alongside all of you. Thank you all for being here, and I'd like to welcome our panel to the stage.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I want to say first a big thanks to the New York Public Library for hosting us and for their events team for all their hard work. And we also want to give a big thanks to the Rikers Public Memory Project admin team for bringing us together, for making this happen. So you could give all of the folks whose work makes this happen a hand. Welcome, everyone. You all here in person. We also have folks watching via live stream. My name is Dr. Shana Russell. I am a public school teacher and a scholar of literature and history. That means I spend my time either researching or teaching stories and storytelling. And in my capacity as the chief historian for the Rikers Public Memory Project, I get to be a part of a community dedicated to preserving the stories of those impacted by Rikers Island. The Rikers Public Memory Project collects and makes visible the stories of those who have been directly impacted by Rikers. When we started this project, in addition to that mission, we had 2 goals. The first one was to use our work to mobilize action towards the closure of Rikers and reparations for those who have been harmed by Rikers. And we also, more to our purpose for being here tonight, wanted to disrupt the disturbing public narrative about those who have spent time at Rikers. It is the 21st century. So we made our archive publicly accessible online. We created social media. We created multimedia. We have a curriculum. We hosted public events. And you can learn more about all of those things at rikersmemoryproject.org. But we still were left with the question of how can we change and impact the public record? So how do we make sure that these stories become a part of the historical narrative of New York and New Yorkers? And that's where the New York Public Library comes in. I believe that libraries are probably the only democratic institution left in the United States. The New York Public Library is one of the largest library collections in America. I believe the 2nd largest after the Library of Congress. So having this archive here is a really big deal. The New York Public Library, they are champions of documenting and preserving the rich history of New York City, and they understand that the everyday lives of New Yorkers lie at the center of that. So in a time when the story of Rikers is dominated by legal documents, sensationalist journalism, terrible TV shows like Lock Up and Law & Order, sorry, Law & Order fans. But having our oral history at the New York Public Library means that we get to place directly impacted New Yorkers at the center of the public record about Rikers. And when Rikers closes, as my friends at Freedom Agenda like to say, they will be, directly impacted New Yorkers will be the ones who get to narrate its history alongside the other really incredible collections that are here at the library. So with that, I would love to introduce you all to our esteemed panelists. First, to my left, well, they're all to my left, but we have Edwin Santana, who is a Puerto Rican New Yorker, self-taught filmmaker, photographer, and formerly incarcerated individual, who has dedicated his life to social justice. He founded the company Tough Art Media, and his advocacy work revolves around closing Rikers and decarcerating New York City. He also works as a community organizer at Freedom Agenda. To his left is Turquoise Martin. As a community advocate and native New Yorker, Turquoise Martin is deeply rooted in restorative justice reform, supporting initiatives such as Close Rikers, Halt Solitary, and the decriminalization of sex work. Her advocacy is both personal and purposeful, Having experienced the incarceration of many loved ones, she understands firsthand the profound impact the carceral system has on families and communities. Over the years, Turquoise has developed a strong proficiency in navigating the carceral system, offering guidance and support to individuals and families during incarceration and through reentry. She is the founder of the Collective Healing Fellowship, a community-centered healing space designed to support justice-impacted individuals and families through holistic practices. Through yoga, meditation, and sacred movement, Turquoise creates pathways for restoration, self-connection, and empowerment, centering healing as a vital component of justice. Her work bridges advocacy and wellness, affirming that true liberation must include the healing of the mind, body, and spirit. And lastly, to Turquoise's left, we have Tamara Santibañez, who is an interdisciplinary artist and memory worker living and working in Brooklyn. Their work focuses on the intersection of tattooing in the prison industrial complex, understanding the body as a site of archiving and resistance. They are the author of Could This Be Magic? Tattooing as Liberation Work through Afterlife Press, and the poetry chapbook Memory Lane, which was released in 2024. They received their BFA from Pratt Institute in printmaking and an MA in oral history from Columbia University, and they were awarded OHMA's Future Voices Fellowship for 2021, and were a recipient of Duke University's 2024 DocX Fellowship, Otherwise Histories, Otherwise Futures. So those are our panelists, everyone. So we're gonna start with a question for everyone. Why is it important to document the voices of people who have been detained at Rikers? And how can these narratives support healing, movement building, and policy change? Would anybody like to start?
So let's start off with narratives, right? So before I joined the Rikers Island Public Memory Project, I even met anyone from the Rikers Island Public Memory Project. I didn't know what a memory project was, and I didn't know that you can actually, change a narrative that's large, right? So I was worried about being an incarcerated individual at the time. All I thought about was changing my narrative, right? I wanted to change my narrative. I just wanted to change the narrative of my life. But then when I met Piper, and I met Regina, and I met you, and I met some other individuals that were with the Rikers Island Public Memory Project, it started making me really think about like the bigger scale of narratives, right? And that's when, everything kind of like culminated at the same time. My filmmaking, my advocacy work around closing Rikers Island, it was all, and this with the Public Memory Project, all came to and intersected all at the same time. And it was very overwhelming for me, but very progressive, and I was very happy, right? Because I'm like thinking outside the box. And when I started filmmaking, I was like, I have to document this, because I think that filming the movement it helps preserve the movement, right? Helps preserve it. So anything that you can see 50, 60, 70, 100 years from now is something that's great, because whether it's artwork, whether it's tattooing, whether it's clothes, whether it's anything, painting, you're preserving the life of something. And I think that I preserved some of the life of this movement by filming it and having individuals like myself talk about their experiences, and not being afraid, and not being afraid of the backlash that you can get from having been incarcerated for 24 years. I experience that every single day. I'm scared. I'm always scared when I meet somebody that they're gonna not like me because I was incarcerated. Mm-hmm. So that narrative alone, I wanted to change, and I have. But now I'm looking at a big scale when it comes to this Rikers Island, dismantling Rikers Island and shutting it down and closing it and never using it again. That's the history that I want to preserve, because I want people to really, really know that the horrors of Rikers Island was real and will always be real, and not only in my life, but in other people's lives as well.
Beautiful. The importance of documenting the movement and our narrations and our stories is it informs the future, right? And my interview, I wasn't detained on Rikers, I was visiting my partner that I lived with, right? And I was impacted by that. And my partner, he's no longer alive, right? So that experience, the ability to be able to share history and memory and speak for ancestors and people that have, he didn't pass away on Rikers, but there are people that have passed away on Rikers, and they're not able to share their stories of what they went through, what they endured. And I think that's important to know, and that's important for us to be responsible for as living, breathing human beings who have the capacity to share that. Rikers is an institution of structural harm, and the structural, is ongoing and it's documented. So also the stories of the people and the humans that have endured on Rikers should also be documented and ongoing.
So I first came to know Rikers Island as an arts volunteer. I volunteered there teaching drawing, tattoo drawing actually, for about 2 years. And I remember encountering Rikers Island in this very visceral way, and being in this position where I was able to go in and out, and so many people who I knew in New York had no idea even really where it was on a map. And I was hearing very firsthand also the ways that people were talking about it. They would say, oh, you're going to Rikers, is it safe there? Or what are the people there like, right? And just hearing again and again these narratives being repeated to me. And understanding how even for people who were, liberal or well-meaning, that they really crept in around the edges, that it was so pervasive, that it really seeped into the consciousness of New York. And that each person who I had the privilege of working with there was just an entire universe in and of themselves. And that's something that really strikes me in listening to the stories in the collection, and then have gone to do the interviews for the collection, is just the amazing consistency of abuses that people name that repeat themselves again and again and again and again from story to story to story, but also the uniqueness of everyone's horrific experience there, that each story has something that I have not heard before. And so as a collective, they are so powerful. And as someone now who's also doing a lot of historical research, archival research about the development of the carceral system in New York, we know very well that the texts that are found in archives are not reflective of the totality of that experience, and that they often purposefully conceal those realities, and that the voices of people who lived it are just crucial countertexts that are telling the truth, and that cannot be erased or silenced from the record.
Thank you. So we are now very excited to share clips of some of the oral histories you can hear in the collection. We're going to start with Edwin. So Edwin is one of our narrators, in addition to being on the Rikers Public Memory Project Advisory Board. So we will hear that clip. There'll be a transcript up as well. And then we'll ask Edwin a follow-up question about that.
I think that this fight is a long, drawn-out fight that's needed. The Rikers Island Public Memory Project, I love it. I love the fact that we are getting some raw stories from individuals who have experienced this, whether they lived on the Rikers Island, or they worked there, or they visited, or they volunteered there. And it's very important that the public know and understand that Rikers Island was not full of criminals, was not full of the lesser of our society. It's not a place where you put undesirables. It's not a place where you put poor people, because you just want to get rid of them. It's an institution of horror. It's an institution of horror, and people need to know that, right? So, no offense to you, but I'm not gonna whitewash anything when it comes to Rikers Island, and I don't think anybody should. Rikers Island should be remembered for what it is, an institution of horror.
Edwin, can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important for us to have those raw, honest conversations about Rikers, and why people who are directly impacted are the ones who really need to be at the forefront speaking about this issue?
Thank you for that question. Now that I'm a filmmaker and I not only direct and film, right, do camera work, but I also edit, right? And sometimes I hate editing because you can lose stuff in editing. And when I was approached to be interviewed for this project for the archives, what really, really stood out to me was that it wasn't, they told me it was not going to be edited. It was just going to be, whatever I said, and that's what it is. And that kind of like really, really, really helped me understand that people's stories need to be like that. They need to be raw. They need to be uncensored, right? Because sometimes when we talk about mass incarceration, when we talk about all these issues, whether it's homelessness, drug addiction, whatever it is, mental health, whatever it is, sometimes sometimes being censored can hurt, right? Like, so for example, when I filmed individuals for the movie I had called Closing the Last Penal Colony, I kind of ran up on them, right? Excuse my language. But I kind of like ran up on them during like marches and rallies, and I was like, hey, why should we close Rikers? And I think that two things, right? They knew me, not know me enough like we're family, but they knew me enough to know that, okay, this guy's not going to twist my words. And when you watch those interviews, you get that rawness. And that's what I wanted, right? That's what I wanted for the film, because it's like in your face, right? Instead of, like I said, I'm whitewashing it. I don't want to whitewash anything, right? I wouldn't want anybody that lived through the carceral system, lived through Rikers, Spofford, Sing Sing, Marcy, you name it. Those people who lived their lives and visited those places and worked in those places should tell the story, because sometimes when it hurts when it's raw, it hurts when it's uncensored, but you can find some healing and some, I want to say this word right, the catharticism. You can find some of that in the rawness of it, right? And I'm the type of person, I did 24 years in prison, and I can tell you, there's anybody no harder than other individuals that are locked up with you. They'll tell you like it is, man. They'll tell you, you're doing wrong, man. You're wrong. You have to stand up. You got to stand on your own too, right? And I think there's healing in that. It's hard, yes, it's hard. It's difficult. We got to hear these stories of individuals that have visited Rikers, that just visiting somebody that they love, they have to get the abuse, right? And I think there's healing in just naming it. Just saying, yo, listen, man, Rikers is terrible. Rikers need to be shut down. Rikers does this. Rikers does that. And when I go out in the community and I talk to people in my capacity as a community organizer with Freedom Agenda, I listen to the raw, undisputed conversations to the public. People that say, F Rikers, keep it open. People who says, forget about those individuals that's in there. They're criminals. They tell you that things, and I have to eat that because it's okay. It's like, okay, cool, that's your opinion, but it's okay, it's all right, because we're changing narratives here, right? We're changing that narrative I said earlier about the larger scale. I feel like whatever we're doing, whatever y'all doing, the audience, everybody here, what we're doing, we're not doing it for us, and we're not even doing it for our kids. We're doing it for the 2-3 generations before that, and sometimes, right now, you can't see that because the rear view mirror effect. It's far, but it looks close, but it's really far. And like I said, man, just talking sometimes and naming it is really helpful for me and a lot of individuals that I spoke to. People were hard on me on the street too. They tell me I should have never came home. I should have been buried, under the jail. But I accept that, and I say, where is this person coming from They're not coming from hurt. They're just coming from a place of care. Like, I want my community safe. And I understand that, right? So, like, documenting that stuff and seeing, you know, sometimes you see stuff in the news and you get mad. But what do you do with that anger, right? What do you do with that? Do you just like, forget about it, I'm not gonna, or do you really pay attention and say, you know, I'm gonna pay attention to this issue because this issue is really important? So, you know, like, I appreciate that question because I still go through it to this day. You know, like thinking about my healing and other people's healing and my community healing and am I doing the right thing? You know, we have to have those questions, man, and just documenting that and you know, whether it's audio, whether it's film, whatever it is, whether you're just writing it down, whether you're writing poems, you're doing artwork, whatever it is, do it, document it, because people need to see that rawness. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. We are certainly glad that you are here and in community with us, for sure. So we're going to listen now to a clip from Turquoise's interview, which, as she already mentioned, is about sort of visiting as opposed to being detained at Rikers. So we'll listen to that, and then we will have a question for Turquoise.
And how do those who have been affected by Rikers Island heal from all the harm?
I think to heal, that it's important to remember our humanity and our connection to humanity, and not forget those times and moments when either we were able to do something kind for someone else or when someone has done something kind for us. I think those are always very strong focal points to stay in touch with our own humanity and compassion.
So how do you think Rikers should be remembered after all that?
I think it should be remembered for the belly of the beast, ice cold, dank machine that it was. I think it also should be remembered as a symbol for when change and justice and a fight for humanity also began, and that it happened. I'm really proud of the people that have experienced Rikers Island and spoke up against it and fought for humanity and for themselves.
Turquoise, I'm wondering if you could speak to how do we balance telling the truth about Rikers, that raw truth that Edwin talked about, while making sure that we're leaving space for the resilience of survivors and the capacity or people's capacity to heal?
So, balancing the truth and the resiliency, and thank you for that question. Well, we tell the truth without dilution, right? And unapologetically, so that we are aware and informed. The truth has its place, and we want to keep that, like no sugarcoating, because that is how we will balance the resiliency and the emotions and the healing that is required for human beings and individuals that have experienced it. We don't want to sugarcoat any of it. And in telling the truth, in that balance there is this place that people have experienced, this thing that have happened, and I don't ever want to reduce a human being to something that happened to them, but to give them the autonomy and their authority to share their experience about what happened to them and how they got to the resilience, right? So we tell the truth about Rikers, and we allow space and care, and we listen to understand so that we can hear the human that experienced it, their memories, their emotions, their thought process, what was lost, what was missing, who was missing them. There's so much more to the story than just Rikers, and I think it's on us to really dig for that, you know? It says a lot to like learn to listen and listen to learn, right? And learning to listen to care and to understand, and not just listening to gather information or data collection, right? So that is a practice that we must become aware of and actually cultivating and honing as we interact with human beings on any level, but also people that have gone through something as tragic as Rikers, as there's so many ways to describe. But I think the balance is in that, and not the harm or the resiliency countering one another, but holding them as both sides as two sides of the same coin. Like that is necessary. If we tell the truth, we need to also hear the experience and hear this person's history there and who they are and what makes them them. And we may learn that, you know, we have more similarities than differences, and be able to connect more as a community, as a collective, and connect to each other and not have these barriers of limitations. Thank you.
I love that as a takeaway, the idea that, so for me, as somebody who, you know, spends a lot of time listening to oral history, like hearing the human anytime I'm listening. I love that. So our last clip actually comes from Tamara's interview with our narrator, Kelly. Tamara is part of our community of volunteers. So for any of you who might be interested in volunteering, we do have 2 virtual volunteer opportunities on May 6th and May 20th. So check out our social media if you want more information, or sign up for the newsletter. But for now, we will hear a series of clips, and then we'll have a question for Tamara.
What's something that you think we should never forget when we talk about Rikers?
I might cry on this one. The human suffering. Yeah, I'll cry on this one. To see mass human suffering. Just women just the dehumanization and the suffering, because they all, you know, the stories, they also stick with me. Just throwaways, and they're not. We are not throwaways.
How do you think New York would be different without Rikers?
I think it'll stop the generational incarceration, because that's exactly what it is. I think won't stop the historical trauma that's there. It might slow down the generational trauma, because it's all interrelated. There's a lot of bigger pictures. Like, a lot has changed since I was incarcerated, and I acknowledge that, and it's so good to see that. So what I want to say is that when you mass incarcerate people, what do people think? That we're just going to all fall off the face of the earth? And guess what? We didn't. And this is the outcome of what happens when you mass incarcerate people, because these people get out. We are not what you labeled us. We are not what you deemed us to be. We are not what society constructs us to be. but we're actually a group of people who are amazingly resilient and adaptable. That resilience and that adaptable creates communities and people within the communities that are everything from entrepreneurs to organizers to mentors to credible messengers to academics to writers. And I see a brighter future for people that should never go there in the first place. Ever. Nobody should. I don't care what you did. So there's got to be another way, because this isn't working. It never works. It's insanity. It's doing the same thing, expecting different results, and it's not getting anything. Nothing. And you're warehousing. That's all you're doing. So, yeah.
That's so powerfully said.
So, as an interviewer, I'm wondering if you can speak to the role that care plays both in conducting the interview, but also in the way that we preserve it.
So one thing that I love about Rikers Public Memory in particular is that network of community and care that is holding the interviewing processes and stewardships, because it really is about this constellation of relationships and of also building and sustaining political power. And so it's not just, you drop in, you're interviewed, you never see each other again. And I find that so crucial for this type of interviewing in particular. And I also feel really passionate about transcripts, transcribing, how those things are handled, especially having a transcript edited, maybe more than half of the collection, making sure that the written texts are true to people's word, understanding how errors there can really misrepresent somebody and do a different type of violence. Transcripts and archiving are something I feel really, my special interest as an oral historian. But making sure that those stories are accessible in audio and in reading form. But I really loved, Turquoise, you were mentioning earlier how the thing that really stayed with you about the experience was that you felt taken care of. And that, I think, is also what enables the generosity and power of the way that people are able to tell these stories so openly and so honestly, without needing to feel guarded or self-protected, because they know that they're being taken care of and that their voices will be too.
Thank you. And our narrators have been so incredibly vulnerable in the things that they chose to share. And it's important to honor that as well. So we'll end with a question for all of you. What is your dream for a New York City that remembers Rikers after it's gone? When it closes?
Yeah. I'm going to hit that before y'all do. Hold on. So, a city without Rikers Island, man. It's going to be a lot of work. Right? Because, like I said, the narrative around mass incarceration, not only here in the city, not only here in the state, but in this country is ridiculous, right? You can be accused of the smallest crime, and people just want you to live in squalor. They just want you to live in a gulag. They want you to live in a dungeon, right? What kind of mindset is that? Who are we when we criminalize stuff like homelessness and drug addiction? Who are we? And in a city of bright lights and money, right? Because we live in one of the richest societies here, right? In New York City, whether we like to think about it or not. Especially when you think of New York City being progressive, right? I don't think I ever felt New York was progressive until just recently when they said they were going to close Rikers Island. Now I'm okay, now we're talking about some progressiveness now, and that's what I love about this movement. I failed to mention earlier when you asked me the earlier question about the voice of us, formerly incarcerated individuals leading this movement, and I'm yes. We should lead this movement, and we should lead anybody that was affected by mass incarceration, that has been affected by Rikers Island, whether you visited, you worked there, whether you had to spend some time there. We all have a voice. We all should use that voice. And I think this movement, especially with Rikers Island Public Memory Project, they helped me back. They backed me with that, right? They patted me on the back and said, yeah, man, go use your voice, Edwin, man. People need to hear you, right? In a time where I'm like, nobody needs to hear me. And you have to, because I've experienced juvenile. I went to prison when I was 15 years old, right? So it's like, I grew up in the system, and sometimes I feel like a piece of turd sometimes, but at other times I feel like I'm gonna use this experience because this is what I have, right? I'm gonna turn something bad into something good. And I think that all of us in this movement, whether we like to think about it or not, does that when we use our voice and say, close Rikers Island. Thank you.
My dream for like the future is hope. I think it's really important to know that there are over 90% of people that go to Rikers that are not convicted of a crime. That's right. Right? So the hope for the future is that we do not continue to over-police communities, that we do not continue to criminalize mental illness and homelessness, and that we adopt a culture of care, concern, and consideration for our fellow humans. Also, the dream for the future is that people know that the movement wasn't inspired by Rikers. The movement was inspired by the people. That's right. Right? So that's my hope for the future.
Thank you.
When I think about closing Rikers, I think about the land. You know, I think about the rematriation of the land and the stewardship and restoration of the land that was a toxic landfill and has been poisoning the people who have been incarcerated on it. But I also think about Rikers as being the culmination of such a long history of incarceration in New York, and I don't know what the right way to memorialize that is. I think about how do we remember Blackwell's Island? How do we remember the Women's House of Detention? Because I do think that one of the strongest arguments for abolishing the prison system is a longer view of history. We see again and again and again this cycle of reform leading only to expansion. And so that, looking backwards, the history an oral history is not simply about the past, it's about the present and about the future and about what we are determined not to repeat. And we know that. We've seen it so many times over, and we have so many voices today who are powerfully articulating that time has come. And so, yeah, imagining a New York City without Rikers Island would just being able to breathe deeply, right? And knowing that no one is being held there.
That's right.
I'm not supposed to answer this question, but I want to. My dream is that good journalists will come to the library and research in our collection. Yes. And so it will, front page of the New York Times will not say that Mom Donnie closed Rikers Island, but that a bunch of very incredibly strong and honest, directly impacted people were actually the ones who, by telling their stories and doing all this advocacy, were able to close it. So that's my dream. Thank you all. So I think we will now take some audience questions. There are cards, and some of those questions might come from the live stream. And we have a few minutes. They're coming. People are coming around to pick up the questions. There's some here in the front. Perfect. Thank you. I like this question. Thank you. We're a community.
Community, that's right.
As it happens to be the first question, which I like this one. how can we honor those from past generations whose stories weren't able to be told? I know it's a big question. I'm very glad I'm the question asker.
You look like you're compelled.
I'm compelled, yes. So, well, shout out to Rikers Public Memory Project and the Narrative Change Fellowship as well. I was able to contribute to that project, and in that, I was inspired by women that were taken out of communities, right? And what did the community look like? When did a women's facility open up on Rikers? And those questions that I had to myself inspired me to go find women, people that had experiences to share, and those questions informed me. So one way to do that is really to dig up history and be curious in conversation and questions. Again, to listen with care. There may be people among you that do not share that they've ever been to Rikers because of how they feel like they may be perceived or received or not received. So in the culture of the Rikers Public Memory Project is this culture of care, right? So I will implore you to adopt that when you are engaging with other people, and that's how we get to learn more about people and the stories that they don't tell, that they don't always feel safe or comfortable telling. So we can be the gatekeepers and the archivers and hold space for other people to share their stories, even if it's not documented, even if they just told one person, you know. That experience, it ripples throughout humanity. So.
I like this question because it's specifically about oral histories. So the question is, were narrators worried about or scared of retaliation for speaking out on the record? And how did the project respond to that fear? I can speak to the response part. So the process of figuring out how to do this with care, we spent a lot of time talking about what informed consent would look like, how we wanted our interviewers, to do training and like what that would look like. So that was the result of lots of conversation, lots of feedback from directly impacted people. So on the front end and the post-interview, there's a lot of space for permission, informed consent. People knew it was going to be on the public record, that even if they were anonymous, it'd be possible for someone to know who they were. So hopefully, on our end, we were able to kind of preemptively respond to that kind of fear by just informing people. Because we were not trying to sort of force or pressure anyone into giving an interview. It wasn't that kind of process. People were surprisingly, a lot of people were willing to be vulnerable and tell their stories in that way. But I'm wondering, Edwin, would you like to respond to that too?
Yeah, just really quickly. Big up to the Rikers Island Public Memory Project, because when I got involved, they got me involved as an advisory role, right? And I didn't know exactly what that entailed until I actually sat down and we started going over through stuff like that, like how are we gonna interview people? And it was at that point where I was like, interviewing, like we're gonna start interviewing people about this thing here, like, and red flag starts coming up, like, people gonna want to retaliate or something like that. But my voice was that, we need to be a little mindful of how we talk. We get this information from individuals because it might trigger them, right? And I think that the staff, everybody at Rikers Island Public Memory Project took to that and really with the training, with the interviewers, they let them know that, and they train them really, really well. So I shout you out in the process, because I felt like my voice was part of that, right? It was like, hey, I don't want to be triggered, I don't want to be traumatized. So please, be easy. And they was like, yeah, cool. We're gonna work around that. We're gonna do that, and I think that's what we accomplished.
Thanks, Edwin. Tamara, can you speak to that as an interviewer, if you don't mind?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I want to say, first of all, shout out to the training that they give to interviewers, because it's really great. And I say that as somebody who, has a whole professional degree in oral history. What the project put together is so valuable and so considered, and obviously so collaborative, which I think is its strength. And yeah, I think that it also really, the framework of oral history is informed consent, and is knowing that you'll be able to listen to it afterward, and knowing that you'll be able to, redact your story if you need to. And that also goes a long way. But again, I would say it goes back to those, the sort of pre-interview relationships, processes, discussions, and then the aftercare, the follow-ups. Rikers Public Memory Project is so good about having healing days where people can come get acupuncture, and is considering the body and the meals and all of these things that are also taking care of you, knowing that things are going to arise as you're reaching back into those memories and recounting and reliving them.
I'll also say it's a developing process. And so, we've gotten better, or maybe not better, but we've grown what that looks like for us as a team, and it will continue to change. So I think that's the other thing, is leaving space for that to change if it needs to. So here's another question, and this kind of reminds me about what Edwin was saying earlier about how he wasn't sure what an archive was. I think because I spend so much time there, I don't realize that most people do not spend time with the special collections of the library. So how do we help circulate these memories/oral histories? So to make sure that as they are here at the library, that the community is also able to access them and feels comfortable and safe doing that.
So I'm sorry, say that one more time.
How can we help to circulate these memories/oral histories? So now that they're at the library, recognize that they are both from the community and for the community?
I think we're doing it. We're doing it right now.
Tell a friend, tell a friend.
Tell a friend, tell a friend, right, exactly. I grew up in Southside Jamaica, Queens, so it's we was always talking to each other. Back then we had to use pay phones and all that, right? So, it was hard to get information out. Now it's so simple, man. Everybody that's on your phones right now, take out your phones. Please go to the Rikers Island Public Memory Project. Please follow Freedom Agenda NY on all platforms. Follow me on Tough Art Media, because we're always posting.
And the library.
And the library, New York Public Library, right? So we're always posting. We're always telling people about our endeavors. But one thing really important I want to say is that it starts at home. Have those hard conversations about closing Rikers Island, about what our archive is with your family, because they're the first ones that's going to be like, you crazy. Closing Rikers, where you going to put everybody? Stuff like that. I get that from my family because they just don't know. So start those conversations with your family, man. Let them know. Do you know what an archive is? Do you know they have an archive for Rikers Island at the library? And you'll be surprised. They'll be like, no. Well, then that's how information spreads. Talk to your friends. Talk to your homeboy, your bestie, your homegirl. Talk to them, your wife, your girlfriend, Talk to them, because that's how the conversation rolls. No matter how they come off and tell you, and that they don't like it, whatever case may be, still tell them, because that's how information travels.
Yeah. I also happen to know that librarians love when you come and ask them questions about their collections. So this question is, and I think this is an important one, so what are the long-term effects of being locked up on Rikers? And I think this is important, right, because Rikers is a short-term facility, in theory. In theory only. But I think in people's minds, right, you go and then you come back. So why might we need an oral history that explains and sort of digs into what the long-term effects of that might be?
I'm going to reserve that to y'all. Maybe y'all want to.
Well, I could say that having, listening to and having done interviews with people who were on Rikers, some people were on Rikers in the 90s. That was quite some time ago, and it affects them to this day. It haunts them to this day, and it really shapes how they move through the world, and the changes that they want to see and are fighting for. And to have had that adverse experience at that young age, many people were juveniles, were 18 years old, just at the beginning of their lives. The 90s don't seem so long ago, but the impact is so long lasting.
Yeah. Also to that, time is one of our non-renewable resources, right? So, so to spend time languishing on Rikers is thievery. I do wanna, so my loved one, his name is Jason White, better known as Chocolate. Thank you. He would call me, and I could hear the chaos in the background. And one day he called me and he said, "Babe, there was a gentleman there. He said he been here, and he just been here. His lawyer ain't come see him, and he ready to just start his term, right?" So I, on the outside, and called the lawyer who was vacationing in Italy at the time that I called. And when he came back, he returned my call. He went to go see, we call him Big Baby. Big Baby did his time. He took the 10 years, did his time. His son was about 3. I was also taking his son and his son's mother to visit him, so we would have visits like that. Talking about community, right? And Big Baby did his time, and now he's home. He's able to be in his now 15-year-old son's life, right? So the long-term effect of just letting the day go by and total and utter chaos day in and day out are not good for any human being mentally, their nervous system. We talk about nervous systems a lot these days. That can't be good for anybody's nervous system, the lack of sleep, the constant fear, the constant survival mode. We go through that every day. Most of us probably go through that every day, going to 9-to-5 jobs. So imagine this being a 24-hour cycle for a person's human physiology. So consider that, again, consider humans. When we think about Rikers, consider the humans.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that real quickly. Thank you. You hit it right on the nose. Think about it. Think of everyone as a human being. That's it, man. Like, we all different. We all deal with trauma different. How I'm dealing with my trauma, right? From Rikers, from Spofford, from Goshen, from Sing Sing. I've been to all those places, and every single facility is different, right? Every single facility has its own injustice, has its own, horrible experience that you can go to. Even a chill out place like Woodburn Correctional Facility, like where you can actually stay and don't have to worry about somebody, killing you or something like that, right? It has its own trauma. I've been there, so it's like just think about it like that, man. You find somebody that's trustworthy of you, and they admit that they were on Rikers. Just take that as a grain of salt. Take that as a person. Everybody's not super traumatized, and not everybody's not traumatized, right? One of the biggest traumatizations we can talk about is Khalif Browder, right? But I never thought about that when I came out of Rikers Island. Prison is a different story, right? And I thought about that many times when I was in prison, but it does travel to me, man. It does affect me sometimes when I pass Rikers Island, when I go to, the big sign and we have rallies there and things of that nature. So sometimes it affects me largely, sometimes it affects me small, right? So everybody's different. Just kind of deal with everybody humanely.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question. And we will take this from a library worker because we're at the library. So as a library worker, the question is, what are some books that you personally recommend to educate ourselves and the public about Rikers? 0. But I will ask our panelists, where would you, in the absence of, right, a host of books, which there should be, about Rikers because it's been around so long, where do you think people should go if they're looking for information about Rikers and a movement for closure?
I don't know about any specific book, right? Because I read some books and they're really cool, and I can't really name each one. I would just say, in this era of social media and websites and things of that nature, follow the movement. Follow Freedom Agenda, follow the New York Public Library, follow Rikers Island Public Memory Project, because ain't nothing better than kind of like getting the source right then and there, right? Opposed to like going to look for a book. Now, I read 100,000 books about, Puerto Rican liberation, about the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, you name it. I've read tons of books, right? But when it comes to Rikers Island, ain't nothing better than the people who are actually leading this work and actually talking about their experience. Listen to them, talk with them, right? Watch their story, listen to them and listen to their family stories, because that's where you can get that sense of what Rikers Island is and will eventually end.
Yeah. I mean, if you just want a book rack, but get If These Scars Could Talk on Amazon. But also, what comes to mind is when I was maybe about 12, I read Man, Child in the Promised Land by Claudie Brown. And I think it's an awesome read on a human being going through life in New York, going to Spofford, and being resilient and really changing his life, becoming the man that he was intended to be despite the disruption of incarceration. So and then other autobiographies and books like that. So.
I mean, I think when it comes to Rikers Island specifically, I have to shout out the timeline, the historical timeline that the project does. I mean, it's just such a valuable resource, especially for people who are new to the longer history. And then
Where can they find the timeline?
The timeline is at rikersmemoryproject.org.
Okay.
But again, there is such a difference between the written histories and the voices that bring it to life, and that are granular and nuanced and animated. And so just plugging again, just listening to the stories in the archive and to the people who are speaking in real time.
Just one more thing. So like just listening to like your talk right now about like people's experiences. Rikers Island has touched a lot of celebrities' experiences too. For those of y'all that know who Lil Wayne he spent time on Rikers. Tupac spent time on Rikers. James Brown, Sylvia Rivera. They all did some type of work or some type of time on Rikers. So like you could actually listen to their stories, read their books, right? Yes. And get a sense of what Rikers was or Rikers is. Yes.
Thanks for bringing up the timeline. I had the privilege of being the person who did the research for that. Designed also by Isaac Scott, who was also directly impacted, which was really great. I also want to mention that the larger oral history is transcribed, tagged by subject matter. So if you're interested in a particular topic, women or what have you, you can also look at it that way. So there's lots of ways to listen to people who have been directly impacted and learn about Rikers from those who experienced it, which is awesome. If we could give another thank you to our panelists, and thank yourselves. Thank you all for sharing space with us, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.